Hello, everyone. My name is Dan Armstrong. I'm the Corporate Communications Specialist here at Covenant Eyes, and today we have a very special guest on our Facebook Live program. It's our pleasure to welcome Chap Bettis to the program today. I met Chap at the Teach Them Diligently conference in Columbus, Ohio earlier this year. He's the author of the DiscipleMaking Parent. His passion is equipping parents to pass the gospel baton to their children. And we hear about many people, their children, somewhere between, some would say 50% up to even maybe 70% of children who grow up in the Christian faith leaving that faith or leaving the church altogether. And Chap works to help parents, to equip them to help disciple their children on this. So Chap, welcome to the program today.
Thanks. It's good to be with you, Dan.
You can find Chap at his website, theapollosproject.com. We'll have that linked in the description in the comment section here as well. Also, a link to his book, The DiscipleMaking Parent, which we encourage everyone to get a copy of. Chap, you wrote an article that is posted currently on the Apollos Project that we're going to link to as well. It's called The 7 Discipleship Objectives for Raising Sexually Healthy Children. And we deal a lot with those kinds of issues here at Covenant Eyes, and we appreciate your insight and experience and knowledge in this area. We want to have you, if you can, outline the significance of parents raising sexually healthy children. That sounds kind of weird, I think, for a lot of people, but raising sexually healthy children, what is the significance of that?
Well, thanks. Yeah, I wrote The Disciple-Making Parent because I believe that biblically, the paradigm that we're to think about parenting is the Great Commission, that we're to pass the gospel to our children, and that includes, as Jesus commands us in the Great Commission, to teach them to obey all that I've commanded. And you see that with the command to fathers and parents in Ephesians 6, that we're to bring them up in the instruction of the Lord. And so obviously one of the big areas that Scripture talks about is this area of sexuality. In fact, in the New Testament, the two biggest areas that Scripture talks about, one is anger, and there are all the sorts of sins around anger, and then the other is sexuality. And so yeah, that's obviously a part of discipling our kids. And I was working with the young parents in our church, and they're, of course, in the throes of young parenting and thinking about this, and they've got everywhere from 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And as I sat down and thought about what would I hope to cast the vision for, I think as an older parent, it included thinking through, okay, what Lord willing could they look like in their 20s? And so that's just this idea of a healthy sexuality. And so that's where that article came from. I can list a couple for you, and you're welcome if you want to talk about any of those. But the first is just information and trust, just the idea that our children trust us as a source of information. There's a good and healthy dynamic in the home. That's just really the foundation of really all that we're going to talk about, the rest of the ones. And that's we could go into that about establishing that. But then I think in the younger years, when you've got young kids, you're thinking, okay, I want to protect their innocence. Definitely, we live in a sexualized culture. There are producers, there are media types gunning for my children, and of course that's predicted in Matthew 18:6, where Jesus talks about that there are those who will bring things to cause children to stumble. And so part of what we want to do is, okay, how do I protect their innocence in the younger years? And that's the part of the good work you're doing at Covenant Eyes, is just having protection on our devices so that they won't stumble over things accidentally. We've literally got a sewage pipe that comes into our house, comes into our devices, and what are we going to do to prevent that? And then again, thinking of the younger years as well, just a protection from abuse. Unfortunately, whether it's adults or sometimes other kids. And I just heard a story within this past month, and just from a child and another child. So just thinking about those things, but then also thinking at some point I've got to transition. So if I'm still trying to protect my teenager, then I'm not thinking right. And so then you start to think about inoculation. We live in a sex-saturated culture. But here's to me the encouraging thing: we're not the first Christians who lived this way. So obviously there were There were Christians in Corinth with teenage sons. There were Christians in Ephesus and in Rome, having to raise their sons and daughters. So the gospel's powerful enough. But we see in Proverbs 5 to 8, a father inoculating his children, bringing things up and saying, hey, this is what you're going to face. So, and then transitioning, of course, later, casting a vision just of God's goodness. Do mom and dad love each other? You know, are they showing affection in the home? A lot of times as Christians, we're always saying no, 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 and that's what our kids hear. And certainly there is a place for that, but also to say, hey, this is God's gift, God's good gift. But like uranium, like the radioactive elements, he says, for your protection, handle with care. Here's some things to put it in. And then finally, just equipping to fight temptation, the teenage years, we know that. And then we could talk about any of those, go back and talk about any of the ones you want to talk to. But I'm passionate for living in this age, I think also, that we have to equip our children to speak with an apologetic, which is the biblical word for defense, about some of these gender issues that we're seeing. So not only do we inform them, but we're praying that they're convinced, and then thirdly, hoping and praying they're courageous and shrewd. And as Christians, we're going to have to be even more courageous and even more shrewd in the days ahead. So just thinking about that, and then so as a parent right now, you're just feeling crushed and overwhelmed. I know that. So I'm not saying that, but to have these things in your mind, to say, okay, as we go about life, we've got plenty of time. We've got the church to help us. But at some point, we want to touch on these and think about these a little bit.
I think a couple things I think we'd like to drill down a little bit. I think that first one, trust. I think that is so important for a child growing up to trust their parents, to be able to trust their parents. And when something comes up, they saw something that they don't understand, they saw something that entices them, to be able to come to those parents and feel like they're not going to be screamed at or shunned or just to put them somewhere else and make them feel like they're a bad person because they came to mom and dad and admitted something, rather than welcoming them with open arms and appreciating the honesty and the tenderness of seeing something that is could potentially hurt them. What do you tell parents to do with their children to start that relationship? Maybe they failed quite a bit and they're not a very present parent for their children. What do you teach them in a practical way to start establishing trust from parents and their young people?
Well, I think kids naturally trust their parents. So then the question is, what are we doing things to destroy that trust? Things like you were talking about, like saying, what in the world are you talking about? Or just sort of a verbal pushing back, as opposed to saying, man, I'm so glad you came and talked to me. You can talk to me about anything. I want to be a trusted source with you. I also think specifically taking time. So to me, one of the issues as parents is we make commitments, lots of commitments, and then as a result, there's not the margin, there's not the downtime to have unhurried conversations. And so, quality time, we can't just decide, we're going to have quality time. Quality time comes in the context of quantity time. And so how do we create that margin, whether it's tucking our kids in bed when they're small. I'm a big proponent of just breakfast dates, especially as a dad. That was a big, I think, huge return on the investment for me. I spend 45 minutes and $5, and I make my daughter's day, I make my son's day, but then also I'm investing that time for my kids so that when those teenage years come, now I have a context. So if I want to have either a sensitive conversation about sexuality, I want to ask questions, bring something up, and now I have the context where I can say, I'm going to wait till that next breakfast date, and we built up that relationship, and then I can bring it up, or that other child. So I think those, whether it's inviting that response, or having margin in our our time as parents.
I really like that, because you're not only training the parent, but you're also training the child to realize, dad or mom is interested in you, is interested enough to set aside this time to talk to you, so that anytime something comes up, now's the time to be able to come to me in a one-on-one situation with no one else listening or watching, and we can talk about these things. So I think that's neat how you can train both the parent and the child during that special time.
And we also have those times. I think the other thing is to train our ear to hear, when our child says something like, "Can I ask you a question?" And that could be hurry, you're in the middle of a hurried event or something like that. And to say, "Oh, this is an important moment. My child's opening up his heart or her heart." I have a friend who uses the phrase, she says, "Chores are catch-upable." When a child opens their heart, it's not catch-upable. This is a moment, and I need to value this. I need to stop whatever's going on. And so, yeah, even as my kids have gotten older, and they'll text me, "Can I, have you got time to talk?" And the answer to that is always yes. Maybe not at that moment, now in their 20s living out of the home, but the answer, yes, I always have time to talk.
And also, not only the trust, I thought also the protection from abuse, especially in today's world where you have the Me Too movement, you have women who are more empowered to come forward when there's been abuse involving someone else on them. I think we've had many stories. People come to us and say, the first time I looked at pornography, someone came to me with this, and I had no idea what to do with it. As a young person, I was interested in it. It enticed me. I kept looking at it. I was curious, but they had no context. And so we as parents, of course, we want to protect that innocence, but at the same time, we don't want to preserve ignorance. And I think people often don't see that. They'll say, "I want to preserve innocence, so we're not going to talk about anything when it comes to sexuality to my young person until maybe, I don't know, the teenage years or mid-teenage years," which we all know at that point it's way too late.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember as a pastor, I planted and pastored a church for 25 years, and I used to say to people, "I don't know what your stuff is, but I know you have stuff," or I may not know what your stuff is, but I know you have it. And so, yeah, I think what you're getting at is that as a parent, we keep two contradictory thoughts in our head. One is we're going to protect them as much as we can. We're going to covenant eyes. We're going to, if you want to talk about it in a minute, just kind of have a philosophy towards electronics. Having done all that, we're going to assume that there's temptation, that there's exposure, that there's there's issues that we need to talk about. And so it's both and, not either or.
Why do you think so many parents fail in this? I mean, no parent would ever say, one day I made a decision and wrote it down that I'm going to fail miserably in this. Why do you think parents overwhelmingly fail their children in this area?
Well, there's issues within the parents. This is an awkward subject to talk about. Perhaps it's not been modeled. It's something can't be modeled in the church. Come together. It's more often in the privacy of the home that we're talking to our kids, and so there can be awkwardness on our part. There can be and just fear, like I don't know what to say, and far better. Wrongly, we think, well, far better to say nothing than to actually be shown to not know or to not have the right words, and then busyness. So there's all sorts of push towards this event, that event. And so in that busyness, we're like, oh, well, they're going to take a class at school, and so they're going to be all set. So I don't have to face my fears. We don't have to have this awkwardness. And so, yeah, I think it's easy to push that off on school. And this is a way that the church can help hold parents accountable. Say, here's some tools. There's some tools on the blog post you're going to reference. And here's some tools. And are you talking to your children about this?
Yeah, talk about that policy that you mentioned. What is a good policy, or what have you learned in this space about talking to your children about, okay, this is appropriate media use and this is not appropriate family to family, household to household?
Well, I think what I mentioned, what I was thinking about when I mentioned it before, was in a sense starting way back with the idea of this is my electronic device. So I would say, I would say my children never owned a phone until they were 18. I, on the other hand, at one time owned 6, meaning by that, I am letting you use my device. And so therefore, why wouldn't I know the passwords? Why wouldn't I be able to control what's on there? And so getting ahead of the curve as we introduce things into the house, to say, yes, this is mine and your mom's, and we're going to allow you to use that, much as we allow you to use the car. We're happy for you to have that increased freedom, but with that freedom, of course, comes responsibility. And so then trying to get ahead of that in terms of talking through, here's the responsibility. And I know there are contracts out there that are very helpful, but just to be very specific with our kids and say, look, we want you to have this freedom, just as I want you to know how to drive and be an experienced driver when you leave from my house. You got to know how to handle electronics in this day and age, but we're going to give that freedom to you gradually, and if necessary, pull back if we have to.
I think that's wise, not only in the digital space, but just to teach your children, this room that mom and dad pay the mortgage on is not your room, meaning you can't just leave it unkept. You can't destroy things or neglect things. We expect you to keep things clean and tidy and respect, this property. I think that's key for accountability, even at a very young age. This is the room that you get to use. This is your bed. These are your clothes. We expect a certain amount of responsibility with them and accountability because we're letting you use them. Obviously, the child hasn't paid for them. So that's not only with electronics. I think that's key to teach them a lot of life lessons. And then eventually, as they get older, they understand, they respect their own property much more because, hey, I did pay for this now, and now I understand where mom and dad were coming from.
Yeah, exactly. And especially in the teenage years, it's good to remind them to say, hey, we want you to have freedom. We really do. But here's all the things that we are providing for you. And no, you're not paying for the insurance on the car. You're not paying for the repairs on the car. Depending on how you do that. But here, we want you to have this freedom. But with that comes responsibility. And that's part of the things I think as adults we need to help them, because part of it is the illusion of privacy with what they're texting, with what they're emailing, what they're viewing, and to say, no, this is not actually private in the world. These words matter. I was part of a national organization where some children got removed from that organization because of what they texted. And the organization had to do that. And obviously in that moment, the children are not thinking straight. But yeah.
You've been dealing with this subject for quite some time and very much involved in what's happening culturally with the church and parenting and those kinds of things. Can you cast a vision for us, Chap? Because I'm just wondering, what would life look like? What would our communities look like? What would be different if parents did a much better job at discipling their children? There's got to be something that we can see, that we can kind of reach for as a goal in our discipleship making of our children.
Well, I think as hard as it is for me to watch, I think, our culture melt down, it's also a chance for the church to be more distinct and more different. And so being a part of a community that has, let's just start with just healthy marriages. And obviously I know there's obviously huge strains in marriage and relationships, but for the most part, there's healthy relationships, is just a start there, that the church is built, the church families in the church are living the Christian life at home. And all my kids have remarked as they went to college about our friends, how blessed they were, Sharon and my friends, that they saw healthy marriages. And whereas all these new friends that they were interacting with at college, they've got divorced, they've got this and that. So that's one way, is that the church is countercultural in its families. And then along with that, it's countercultural in its view of sexuality, that it says, yes, this is really good. This is a privilege from God. And yet we're going to trust that in the moment, that God's word, which is restrictive, is actually better. So by, the analogy I've used is it's not like lightning. So someone who sins sexually doesn't get struck by lightning, thank heavens.
Yeah. But
it's more like handling radioactive material. It kills slowly over time, and you've got to trust that Jesus's words about this are good. And so it'd be great to see churches where we're teaching about it, and kids are convinced and embracing that, and then standing against the culture and loving individuals. So on one hand, standing against the culture, but on the other hand, loving broken individuals who say, yes, we all come sexually broken. So there's not, I hope my kids aren't, I don't ever mess up my kids. Well, they come messed up. That's the theological truth. So all the moms can just relax. When I do my seminar, they say, yeah, are you worried about messing up your kids? They come messed up. That's the Bible says that. So having said that, to say, okay, there's grace in our church for sexual brokenness. And so we're not going to be this cloistered group. We're going to have all sorts of people in here where we talk about, yes, there's been struggle there. And so to see conversion, and that's honestly, I love the church I'm in now, where there's just to see an openness where we've got some people who say, yeah, I've struggled with same-sex attraction, and the church welcomes them, and we've seen redemption and growth as well. So to me, it would be the community, but the community modeling both health and also gracious acceptance.
I think as parents, we often, because none of us are a perfect parent and never will be, we get overwhelmed because we listen to something like this and we think, well, there's one more thing that I'm failing at. But one of the best advice I was ever given as a new parent was, you don't have to do everything right or everything perfectly. You just have to do a few things consistently. And if I consistently love my wife as Christ loved the church, if I consistently involve my children, that I'm present with them, they know that I care about them, that I love them, and they can come to me with anything. Those few consistent things will take us farther than me going down my checklist to make sure that I made sure I got everything right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, I look back, and I think every parent looks back and says, "Oh, I could have done some of these better." Mm-hmm. So I agree with that 100%. That if we're loving our children, and then these other things are in loving our spouse, and even in broken homes, we can certainly, there's got to be broken homes that are listening here. If we're walking with integrity, if we're living out the gospel at home, Timothy's home, was not a perfect home. His father was not a believer, and yet he was serving the Lord as an adult. So it's not like we have to have this perfect home. And as you're saying, we have to do all this checklist. Some of this is the nature of the blessing of the church. You're walking in love, and now the youth group is going to talk about this, or you're going to mention, hey, can you guys ever talk about that? And then as a parent, you're going to piggyback on that. You're going to say, oh, what'd you guys learn? Let's talk about this at home. So yeah, absolutely. Please don't go away from this thinking, oh my goodness, if I don't check off all these things, then my kids are doomed. All our kids in that way are doomed. Our children's salvation is not a works program. It's not their works. It's not our works as a parent. And so ultimately, God's grace is going to sustain them and sustain us.
Chap Bettis is the author of The Disciple-Making Parent. You can find him at theapollosproject.com. We'll have those linked on this video as well. Chap, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. And I did want to mention that audiobook is free if they want to email me at the audiobook at the Apollos Project. So yeah, thanks a lot.